When figuring out which MCU series will get a second season, you have to consider a couple of factors: where they fit into the MCU timeline, what characters are involved and how they have changed, and perhaps most importantly, what's already on Marvel's slate. The current MCU shows, WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, both function as event series, where they tie into the events of the MCU and large, borrowing storylines and characters, but they are very much built and written to stand on their own as stories and TV seasons. This is a look at which series might get a season 2 and my rationale as to why. Number 1, WandaVision. No. We already know Scarlet Witch shows up in Doctor Strange 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home, and I'd also bet she's a staple in future Avengers teams as well. I think that the show stays as an event series to kick off Disney Plus MCU, but the characters do show up in other places. Loki. Yes. Loki has the advantage of being about time paradox and therefore can technically happen anywhere at any time in the MCU, which gives it the advantage when it comes to scheduling a new series within the existing timeline and canon. This is also the clearest, easiest pathway to keeping Tom Hiddleston around, which is why the series exists in the first place, is it not? Falcon and the Winter Soldier. No. I originally had yes written in the script and a pretty solid justification as to why, but the positive reception to the show, particularly Anthony Mackie as Falcon, along with the confirmation that Captain America 4 is in the works, makes me think that the series, at least this version of it, is over for now. I could see Bucky and Sam link back up in another show, but it won't be Falcon and the Winter Soldier Season 2, it will be another entity entirely. Moon Knight. No. I think this one, like WandaVision, winds up being an event series where the main character moves on to other characters' movies, Blade perhaps? Obviously, much of this depends on the reception the show gets, and Oscar Isaac playing the character is a big deal, but a single season or a single season plus a movie down the line seems most plausible to me. She-Hulk. Yes. Much like Moon Knight, I expect She-Hulk to show up in the new Avengers in some way, but Marvel seems to understand that Hulk is one of their less popular characters overall, and they have consistently used him as a sidekick in the movies, so it stands to reason that She-Hulk is probably not getting a feature film of her very own. But that doesn't mean Marvel won't want to keep the character around. The easiest way to do that is to progress the show. The early rumors are that since she's a lawyer, it's going to be a hybrid action court drama series, and if there's one thing Hollywood seems well equipped to mass manufacture these days, it's legal procedurals. Ms. Marvel. Yes. She's the closest thing Marvel has to Spider-Man that it doesn't have to share with Sony. Not only is she going to be around, she's going to be at the center of the MCU both on Disney Plus and in cinemas for a long, long time. It wouldn't surprise me at all if her ascent to the Avengers is the core of the Phase 2 of the Disney Plus MCU storyline. What if? Yes. I'm going to say yes on this one because it's the only animated thing in the current MCU, and it feels unique enough and variable enough in concept that Marvel can keep it going for as long as people like it. Keep an eye on the reception it gets because if it's a hit, I could see it outlasting every other show on this list in terms of number of seasons. Hawkeye. Yes, but with the caveat the future seasons will focus primarily on Kate Bishop. Hawkeye is here so Jeremy Renner can have one last hurrah and introduce us all to Kate, who will probably take the reins of the show by the end of Season 1. My official prediction is that Hawkeye Season 1 ends with Kate Bishop being inducted as an Avenger or otherwise symbolically taking the mantle from Hawkeye and becoming the primary protagonist of the show. Secret Invasion. No. In the comics, the Secret Invasion is a long-running plotline, but it's also an event series, and it feels like Marvel is positioning it as the latter in the MCU. All the seeds have already been laid with the Skrulls, and the Secret Invasion will probably tie in with the Marvels in some major way, but I still see this as a one and done. Especially since Sam Jackson would seem to be a major character in it, and he's a busy, expensive man. Which is why he only showed up that one time in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but we don't talk about that. Ironheart. No. Much like Moon Knight, my expectation is that Riri Williams gets her introduction with a Disney Plus show and is then immediately elevated to a higher status, probably appearing in a future Avengers lineup. I also expect to see her cameo in Armor Wars and Secret Invasion, so a Season 2 isn't quite as necessary because she's so integral to some other stories. Armor Wars. No. Similar to Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Armor Wars feels like what might be some kind of a last hurrah for War Machine that changes the status quo in some major way. Again, Marvel loves Don Cheadle. We all do. So I expect him to hang around and show up in future Avengers films and crossover and Secret Wars and Ironheart, but if I had to put money on it, I think they leave it as an event series, which skews closer to what the story of Armor Wars is in the comics anyway. I Am Groot. Yes. This show is probably the furthest out in terms of a firm release date, and will probably coincide with the release of Guardians 3 in some way or another. Given that Guardians 3 is supposed to be the swan song for those characters in the MCU, I think it's more likely than not that I Am Groot is an ongoing series aimed at kids, possibly even animated. James Gunn is producing the show and said after his recent experience shooting Peacemaker that he's really enjoying doing TV. And again, since the show is skewed for kids, it seems like something they will heavily market with toys and other physical products, so it makes sense for the show to be kicking around for a while. The Wakanda Series. No. When I hear Wakanda Series, I think Marvel's version of Game of Thrones. Wakanda is Marvel's most meticulously realized fictional Earth nation, and given the modern landscape of America and the world at large, it seems both a topically appropriate and lucrative place to set stories in. I'm going to cage this prediction by saying that I bet Marvel makes more than one Wakanda-based series, specifically one that focuses on a character we already know, with Shuri being the likeliest candidate, and one that's an exploration of a different facet of the Wakandan culture entirely. But I don't think either show gets multiple seasons. So there you have it. My expectation is that more Marvel shows than not are just one-off series, and from a logistical and planning perspective, it's much, much easier to navigate everything that way. I also expect Marvel continues to further diversify its TV lineup instead of adding additional seasons to existing shows, even if the new shows are fundamentally just extensions of the previous ones. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, think about something like Secret Wars, which is its own show, but it's also a semi-sequel to Captain Marvel and WandaVision and possibly even Doctor Strange 2. Essentially, instead of making a season 2 of most of these series, Marvel will just spin stuff further and further out into the universe. No WandaVision season 2? No problem. You've got Wanda and Vision showing up in Doctor Strange 2, you've got Photon showing up in Secret Wars, and heck, maybe even Darcy shows up in Thor 4. Who knows? Bottom line is that, if you're disappointed that most of these series are probably going to stay as single seasons, don't be. They aren't best viewed as their own shows. They're best considered as chapters in a much larger story that encompasses all of the MCU. Maybe that's obvious. It's entirely possible that Marvel goes in a different route and opts not to do any season 2s at all, that every series is just a one-off because it's easier to devise the stories that way. The one to watch for is Loki, which I think is the most obvious shoe-in for a sequel. And if Loki gets a season 2, I suspect more will follow. But if it doesn't, I'd bet on Marvel shows being single seasons only as the standard to expect going forward. In conclusion, I have divided the Marvel shows into 3 primary categories based on content and likelihood of renewal. Thank you for indulging my wild speculation.